So the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 is actually one of the last Samsung Galaxy Note devices Samsung has ever made, unfortunately, because I love the Note lineup. They brought a ton of devices out. Now, it kind of seems like we may be getting another Note device with the S22 Ultra or something like that. I'm not 100% too sure, but there will never be another lineup like the Note lineup from like 2015 to like 2019. Those devices that Samsung was making between those years was crazy. They started switching up in the Note 10 lineup, but the Note 20 was actually a pretty solid device. The Note 20 Ultra is beautiful, but this phone still has a lot of capability. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and if you still own this phone, it's a great device for sure. Even if you're still planning on buying this phone, I still think it's a pretty decent device. Now, if you want to pick up this device or some other phones I recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, on the front and on the body of this phone, we actually have a 6.7-inch Super AMOLED Plus display, and it's a pretty good looking panel, hole punch display, inbuilt fingerprint sensor in the display as well, and it's a pretty good panel. There's not much to complain about. It's 1080p. It's not a bad 1080p panel. It's actually pretty good. I just kind of wish they didn't make some other weird changes to this phone, which I'll get into in a second, but I will say the panel of this thing is totally fine, and I'm not complaining about this panel whatsoever. Now, on the bottom, we do have a USB Type-C port, which is great. Unfortunately, we don't have a headphone jack or microSD card slot on this thing. Now, no headphone jack, totally expected, but no microSD card slot is very weird. Since then, we've gotten a lot of phones that don't have microSD card slots, even from Samsung, which is extremely strange, and I will never understand that. But in this specific situation, I guess it is what it is. There's really not much we can do about it in this situation. I would have loved to have seen this phone have, a microSD card slot. The Note lineup really signified everything Samsung had at that moment. But again, there's nothing we can do about it. We're pretty much going to have to live with it right now. On the back, another weird thing, we have a plastic back on this thing, what Samsung called plastic, and I think, we've kind of gotten used to it by now. There are some advantages for plastic backs too, but I love the feeling of a glass back. If you put a case on it, I guess it's okay, it doesn't really matter, but I would still love to see glass backs on these things, but it is what it is. We have wireless charging, reverse wireless charging, which is great, and we have that triple camera setup as well. IP certification, and this is a very durable phone for the most part. We have the S Pen as well, which is really cool. It's a stylus that has a lot more capability, and it's battery powered too, which is pretty funny. So without a doubt, the Samsung Galaxy Note 20, body wise, is a little different. It's not the most premium thing in the world, but I guess because it's a couple years old now, it's turning 2 years old this year, at least it's depreciated a little bit in the used market in terms of pricing. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now, hitting on the cameras, this thing has that triple camera setup on the back, a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 64 megapixel telephoto lens, then a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor, and on the front we have a 10 megapixel wide angle lens. Now, we can do 4K at 60 on the front and the back. We also have the ability of shooting 8K videos on the back of this phone. Now, here's the thing about the Note 20, it's still a very good camera. This thing, no matter what, these Note phones have amazing camera setups for sure. And I've never really had a Note phone when I had it at that time where I was complaining about the camera. Maybe the Note 8 was the only one, but that did bring that dual camera setup. But this thing is a very solid camera for sure, and I never really complained about it. It has all the features you would ever want for the most part. It has, portrait mode, cinematic kind of mode thing going for it with portrait video. It has a ton of features for sure. And with the One UI 4 or One UI 5 coming out whenever next year, it's only going to be getting more features in the camera standpoint as well. So when it comes down to this specific camera setup, I am a huge fan of it. I think it's great. My only disadvantage with Samsung phones, and it's a lot of Android phones for sure, apps like Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram, they don't really utilize the full camera app, they don't really utilize the full camera capabilities. It seems like only the stock camera apps can do that. With this phone, a little bit of a different story, but again, I think it's okay, and it kind of comes with the territory. So in terms of the camera, humongous standpoint, and I think it's one of the best features about this phone for sure. Now, in terms of longevity, this is another big thing to keep in mind. The Note 20 right now is still supported with software. It's going to be lasting probably the same amount of time as the Galaxy S20. Now, the Galaxy S10 ended up getting an extra year of software support, so what it looks like is the Note 20 is also going to be getting that extra year as well. So the S10 is ending on One UI 4, which includes the Note 10 as well. So with that understanding, the Note 10 is going to end up lasting probably until next year. It's going to get like a year of security updates too. With the Note 20, it's going to be lasting the rest of this year and probably the rest of 2023 as well. And then after 2023, that's when this phone is going to start getting security updates. So you still have about 2 to 3 years of use out of this phone. So it's really not, a bad performing phone by any means in terms of, software. I personally am just not a fan of One UI, and I don't know too many people who are. So if you're planning on buying this phone, do keep in mind that you may want to go put like a custom launcher on this thing, but it still has a ton of features and it's still supported with software for the next couple of years. So from now until like 2 or 3 years from now, it's still going to be worth it in terms of software. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now hitting on the performance side of things, the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 5G Plus chipset. It has an octa-core CPU, Adreno 650 GPU, and 8 gigs of RAM. There was only one model of this phone that was ever made, and it was that 8 gig of RAM option. And here's the thing about the performance of this phone. It is still a very solid performing phone for sure. It is not a bad performing phone. It still performs extremely well. And as I mentioned before, when you're getting a phone like the Note 20, you are still buying one of the best performing phones that you can kind of buy for the price tag. I mean, if you can get this thing for a couple $100 cheaper than what it came out with, I think it's a pretty decent value. When compared this phone to like the S21 FE that just came out, even the S21 FE may be a better performing phone in some areas, but the Note 20 is still a very strong performing phone. And for it being the last Note phone kind of from Samsung, I think it's a pretty decent ending point. I think this device still is fairly fast, light apps work perfectly fine, and even on the heavier intensive side, they work perfectly fine too. That 865 chipset was pretty strong in 2020, and it's still a pretty strong performing device. 8 gigs of RAM is still more than enough. If you need more, you can always go to the Note 20 Ultra, but I really haven't heard too many people complaining about the performance of this phone, and I still think in 2022, it's still a pretty decent performing phone as well. Could it have been better? Absolutely. But I don't think it's a big deal, and I still think if you need a phone that's going to take you from point A to point B, this is a pretty solid performing phone for sure. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now ending it off with the battery life, this was one of the biggest advantages for picking up a Note lineup because it had one of the best sized batteries. This thing had a 4300 mAh battery inside of it, but again, you have things like wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, which is really cool, and this was another big asset for this phone. The battery life on these phones lasted for a very long amount of time, and you could easily pick up this phone and make it last all day. And because this thing didn't have like a crazy massive, software problem or hardware problem, the battery size and battery life is still pretty decent as well. So very few complaints on my end about this battery life too, and that pretty much covers it up there. And to be honest, like I mentioned before, I think the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 is still worth it in 2022. It's a very good performing phone. It still has a lot of capability. I don't necessarily think it's perfect anymore. Like I mentioned, it has some issues here and there. Like I mentioned, the plastic back I'm not a fan of. The panel isn't like a crazy great panel in this day and age compared to all the other panels we have, but the camera's still really good. The hole punch display looks beautiful. Reverse wireless charging, the S Pen is really awesome, and the performance is still really, really good. If I ever compare this phone to something like the, Galaxy S22 Ultra that's about to come out, then we're going to see that the Note 20 is starting to show its age. But beyond that, this is still a very good performing phone, and as I mentioned before, I have very few things to complain about it in 2022. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.